I really like here is that I can now ask you a macro question.
Sure.
Because I don't know too much about, also a bit of a generalist, but I don't know too much about how the oil and gas industry actually works. So what do you see? Because that's now an industry that's in huge turmoil. So what's going on there? Do you know? What's your assessment of the oil and gas market at the moment? There are two different things already, I guess. But
yeah, so it depends. To look at Canada specifically, we have a very, I don't want to say unique market, but a lot of our companies are constrained heavily by infrastructure. So things like pipelines were very political in Canada. And because of that, there's basically no new capacity coming with pipelines. So what we have is what we've got. So a lot of success in oil and gas is tied to call it the efficiency of oil extraction. So whether your reserves have easy to access and economic oil, there are a whole bunch of different variables there in terms of how much oil is in the ground, how much it produces in terms of effort that you put in and the netbacks and things like that, which is kind of your profit margin on that. So outside of
what do you mean with netbacks?
Sorry, netback is the profitability per barrel of oil. So think of it as like net income per barrel. That's not fully accurate, but that's kind of what it means. So outside of that, so there's extraction, there's transportation, and then there's where you sell it. And those all matter quite a bit. So transportation is important because if you're close to a pipeline, it's a lot cheaper. But you also have to make sure that that pipeline is willing to give you capacity, because at the same time you're there might be 3 other companies also trying to use that same pipeline. So that's another variable to consider. And then there's where you sell, because technically Canadian oil could be shipped overseas and maybe earn a higher premium. A lot of it is just sold to the US. And actually Canadian oil sells at a discount to US oil.
Really?
Because there's a big advantage to demand, a lot of buyer power, because we have really one big customer, which is the United States. And the United States has a lot more infrastructure for oil and gas movement than Canada does. So one of the big political issues was Canada was trying to, I think it was actually natural gas, which natural gas is very similar to oil, because at the same time you extract oil, there's a lot of natural gas in that same reservoir. So a lot of companies will make both. Canada was trying to ship the natural gas and possibly oil to its west coast so that it could then sell it to Asian countries and different markets out that way.
Yeah.
And it got canceled, basically, was so that's the tricky thing with Canada. It's
But why did it get canceled?
Politically. So environmental concerns about there were rare killer whales that lived there and things like that people were worried it would disrupt and it's not to say that those concerns aren't valid, but obviously it led to this economic limitation, if you will. So all to say, it's a very tricky area to navigate naturally, because you have these three important variables: how well you produce it, how you transport it, and where you sell it, that are often very constrained by which land you owned, the infrastructure you have, and the markets you can actually access because of that infrastructure. So it's a lot to consider.
And that's important, for example, for me, like if I want to invest in oil and gas and I'm saying, hey, oil and gas prices, well, especially here in Europe, are insanely high. So I'm going to go invest in Canada, but it could be that Canada is not the best position to take advantage of that, for example. And the US gas, at least, market is much more isolated than many other gas markets. And then that's a good way to get burned as an investor, right? If you don't do the research, then.
Yeah, if you don't understand how the broader market works, and things like infrastructure, for example, like you could find a company that's advertising, hey, we make the most oil at the cheapest price. It's like, great, I'm going to buy that company. Well, maybe they don't have infrastructure, and maybe they have to use trucks to transport all their oil. Maybe that's very expensive to do so. So that's why it's important to understand those three variables. And then on top of that, you have the demand side of it, right? So that's just supply. On the demand side of it, it's, are people even willing to buy oil? And when you have a pandemic, for example, we saw oil prices go negative because there was a period of time where at least investors, it's important to remember that was a futures contract, not a specific barrel, for example. But still to say that people didn't want barrels for a period of time. So it's like any commodity business, it's a tricky area, because not only do you have to have a good business, you have to have a good price, and you don't have a whole lot of control over the price of the thing you're selling. So compare that to like a tech company, like, again, not recommending any businesses, but like Apple, for example, which you could argue has a very strong brand position and a lot of price power.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're in a much better situation to earn hefty profits versus an oil and gas company, which 2 years ago was losing money, now is making a bunch of money because oil prices are higher. Who knows where they'll be a year from now? So it's a really tricky area.
So fundamental investors watching the stream, start with tech. And then only when you're advanced, like Richard, you have seen 100 plain bagel videos, can you move to oil and gas and commodities.
Sure, yeah. I don't actually cover industry-specific stuff, but it's kind of like the same position I take with individual stocks. I don't want to talk too much about individual sectors because I don't want to encourage people to invest in different areas. But for sure, it's
but I think we've given a disclaimer. We've said already, for investment, it doesn't matter at all how good a sector is doing. It only matters how good it's doing compared to its price. And so since we've said nothing about the price, they shouldn't have anything to make investment decisions on, with you talking about oil and gas now, right?